Welcome to the very first episode of Ember in the Dark. I am your host, Mike Warren, and the reason I'm sharing this with you now is very simple for me. I am taking my pain and turning it into purpose to support. The last 3 to 4 years have been extremely challenging for me in facing my shadow, facing my darkness, and I'm recognizing there's a lot of that going on in the world. And my biggest challenge was feeling alone and like there was not anybody out there who could really understand what I was experiencing or going through. And so I'm creating a space for you, the listener, that it may be going through some challenges right now where you feel heard. And that's where the title Ember in the Dark comes from. No matter how dark it may seem to get, even the smallest of embers can light your path. My hope is this podcast can be that ember for you in supporting you in navigating your journey. So let's get into it. It's the origin story. We're going to talk about, raw and unfiltered, where I'm at, what I've experienced, in hopes that it supports you. Welcome to the first episode of Ember in the Dark. I'm your host, Mike Warren, and I want to acknowledge you for tuning in and listening here today. Again, this is going to be my origin story and how I got here. So this is raw, very little editing. I want to encapsulate the experience of being in this dark space that I've been in for the last 4 years, such that it really relates to people that are experiencing it right now, because I believe there's a purpose behind it. And for those that are unaware of that, unclear of it, it's going to be challenging for them to navigate through. And that's why I'm putting this together. And so that's why it's dark. I got the black drop, all of this. It's to simulate this dark space where it feels very closed, encapsulating, isolated. And that's probably the biggest thing that I've been personally challenged with over the last 4 years of navigating this dark space within myself, is feeling disconnected from those around me, from myself, very, very isolating, like there's been a black shroud or cloud placed over me. And it's been about 4 years. I'd say the last 6 months, things have started taking a turn such that I can be here now and start to do this work. And so I'm grateful for that. However, it wasn't always like this. If I were to rewind time a little bit, just to give you some background, I started my journey, I guess you could say, in about 2009, where I was involved with a personal development seminar. And that work alone cracked me open to the power of the mind. I learned a lot of concepts, a lot of constructs of the mental capacity and what can be accomplished with the mind. And it really supported me in navigating through life at that time. And through that work, I created my own business, had my own coaching clients. I have coached many individuals and groups, did a lot of that work, and I was very good at it in the way I can communicate. However, it still wasn't fulfilling. And about 2019, 2020, when the world shut down, is kind of where I really got cracked open to the spiritual side of things. I have never been a spiritual person, didn't really go to church. I had a belief there is a higher power. Call it what you want. That was basically it. However, during 2019, 2020 is when I started really getting into meditation. I would meditate an hour, 2 hours a day, and really started cleaning up my diet and my health. And it was just naturally occurring. It wasn't like I just made a choice. It was something was telling me to drop this and drop that. And so, I started with meat, cut that out, sugar, alcohol, grains, dairy. I basically went from eating whatever I want down to eating essentially nothing with my fasting. However, I ran, for about a few months, a raw vegan diet, and my body felt great. I felt great. Like everything was just rolling. So that period of about 2 years, from about end of 2019 to about 2022, for me, it was an awesome experience. I felt very connected with source, God, universe, whatever you want to call that. such that my meditations, I would have experiences where I'm leaving my body, hearing music in my meditations, and I would meditate at 3 in the morning in a closet. Everyone else is asleep. So I've had some pretty profound experiences, and I'll share more as the episodes go along. However, for this episode, why am I here? There was a turning point in around 2022 where that connection, it felt like it just kind of just shut down. And at first, I didn't think nothing of it. I thought, whatever, it's going to come back, no big deal. And over, the first week, 2 weeks, I started questioning, 3 weeks, a month, where did it go? Where did that connection go? Because in that connected space, internally, I was experiencing peace, love, bliss, like completely on one end of the spectrum. And after about a month, maybe 2 months of it being gone, that's where I started to really start to spiral out. And I started questioning, where did God go? Where did universe, source, where did that connection go? And the story I had attached to at that time was when I was in the connected space, I was meant to do something like a podcast like I am now, or teach or something, and I just never did it. And because I didn't follow what I believed at that time to be my purpose, somewhere along the way, God kicked me out and said, no, you're no good. And I really spiraled out with that story, so much so that it felt like even when I die in this physical form, on the other side, it wouldn't even matter. The soul is written off too. And so everything had felt hopeless for me. It was depression, anxiety, and they would come in waves, and it would feel like I'm drowning and could barely work with my regular job at the time. And, suicidal ideation. One of the lowest points that I had was about 2 years ago, where, I strangled myself with a extension cord until I almost passed out. Like, it was that bad for me. And, there was little glimmers of things that kept me going, one being hope that maybe the next day I wake up, I would have that connection again and, things will get better. And it just never showed up. However, that hope kept me taking each day at a time and not recognizing, the purpose of this dark space. And that's where I can stand now and look back over the last 3 to 4 years of my life as a process of purging. And it's a deep purging process that consciously, if I knew I would go through that experience, there was no way I would consciously make that choice to enter that cave. So it was kind of forced upon me, and I am grateful for it simply because the learnings and the experiences I've had looking back to reflect on how I've been showing up as an individual, as a father, as a husband, as a friend, all of these factors. And I started to recognize that's what got me in the position. That's the story I stood. Like, if I would have shown up differently, if I would have chosen differently, whatever excuse I could come up with, if I could only go back and make a different choice, the shame, the guilt, the regret. And so that's where I really started to struggle, because I would ruminate on those thoughts so much that there was no room for forward movement. And I saw a friend of mine, he's a very powerful teacher, and he started talking to me about my experience. And this was in May of this year. And he said to me, it sounds like you've been experiencing grief. And I've never experienced grief in my life. Even when my grandmother passed away, I just had an intuitive sense that it's not really the end. Was I sad? Yes. However, not a real grieving process that I've seen other people experience. And he broke down the 5 stages of grief. The first stage is denial. The second stage is negotiation. And the next stage is anger. The fourth is depression. And then the fifth is acceptance. And when he broke it down like that, he had shared with me, it sounds like you've gotten to acceptance. Because about May of this last year, I just completely surrendered to this dark space that I've been in. And when he explained to me those 5 stages, I was able to look back and be like, holy crap. I've been going through this process of grief and I had no idea. And being in that connected state where it was, complete opposite end of the spectrum of that love, peace, bliss, you could have locked me in jail and I would have been fine with it, to this end of the spectrum. That's where I struggled, is, where did I go wrong? And recognizing that it was a grieving process. And at the time, I didn't know what I was grieving. However, I recognize now what I was grieving was my old self. My old self containing beliefs, patterns, habits, thoughts, emotions, things that were trapped in my body that were influencing me to operate a certain way that was ineffective for my family, for my life, for what I thought I wanted to do and where my vision of where I wanted to go. However, yet I couldn't action the things. And so I would get little glimmers of hope. And that's what would keep me going. And one of those glimmers I can really remember is a day that it was really rough. And I felt like in my mind, I was talking to myself of like, I'm done. Like, I'm not able to take this anymore. I give up. And I just mindlessly scrolling on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it now. And as soon as I swiped and I said, I give up, where the screen stopped, there were 2 posts and from different content creators. And the first one says, never give up. And the second one says, I'll never give up on you. So I would have these little glimmers, sometimes it's once a month, once 3 months, 6 months, and it just kept me going and it's brought me here. And so again, this is the space that I've created for you, the listener, to recognize that you're not alone. If you're going through a challenging time right now in your dark space, there is a purpose to it. It is a purging process. And it requires surrender and acceptance to begin with. And it took me 3 years to get there. My wife said I was always stubborn. I never really believed her until now. And, even me not believing her is a form of being stubborn, I guess. So I look at myself in this position and recognize, I've been stubborn. Because over these last 4 years, I looked at every modality of healing. Acupuncture, Reiki, PDRT, which is a nervous system retraining, energy work, supplements. I studied the body, the nervous system, gut health. I basically went down every rabbit hole of the human body thinking there was something physiologically wrong with me to fix me so I could be connected again. And so through all of those learnings, I look back now and it's like, I have a good chunk of information that, and a decent understanding such that I can support others and just kind of point them in directions. And that's the point of my podcast here. And for you, the listeners, like, I don't want you to take everything I'm saying as law. When I speak and share, it's a perspective. At the end of the day, if it resonates with you, great. If it doesn't, that's great too. Take what resonates with you and explore. I'm not here to say, go do things. I'm just going to point in a direction to support you. And so if you're going through the dark space right now and having a challenging time, like I said, it is a process of purging. When emotions need to be cleaned out, the way and the only way that I know of for them to be purged is to be experienced. For example, if there's anger within the system, if that were to be extracted from the body, the only way that you can have it truly extracted is feeling the anger as it passes out of the system. We're not able to think our way through emotions. And that's where I struggled for the last 3.5 years, is I really was sitting and ruminating over my thoughts and what I could have done differently and the regret and the shame and all of that. And nothing really started to shift until when those emotional waves would come crashing onto me that I was just too weak and tired to even care, that I could just feel it. And there would be moments where I'd be on the floor in the basement by myself, crying, wondering where God is. And I don't think I can take another day of this. And I remember one time specifically, I just laid down with my arms out and I'm like, this is it. I'm here. And I literally felt a bubble of energy start vibrating in my chest. And it went like this and then out the top of my head. After that passed, I'm like, I still feel like crap. However, I feel lighter. And, within an hour, 2 hours, I was smiling for the first time in months, laughing with my kids, started dreaming again. And so there's a lot of factors that are going on right now in the world collectively that is happening to purge the systems. Where we get stuck is when the mental side of things attaches a story to the emotion. Because the truth of the matter is if you're experiencing anger, if you're experiencing fear, grief, shame, any of those denser energies, those denser emotions, you could look at a situation that happened recently, well, let's say in the last 6 months, year, 2 years. However, what it also could be is something that's been in the system from when you were 5 years old, 10 years old, 15 years old. It could be there for that long. And what is happening is an external situation or an event or a conversation or a person, something external is facilitating the experience to be brought up, to be released. And so one of the first things that I've learned in this process is learning true acceptance and surrender of what is. Whatever you're experiencing emotionally, there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with you in the sense that you're failing, you're bad, you miss something. Because in the moment, whatever you're experiencing in the now moment is true. And so if you've been experiencing anger and there may be somebody cut you off in traffic or your boss said or did something, whatever it is, that doesn't mean they're the source of the anger. That's the situation that is reflecting back to you the anger within you. And the more we blame external, that we give our power away. I'm not saying if people are taking advantage of you or being, ignorant or rude to you, that you just let that stuff slide. No, there is a self-respect that is required and a boundary that you can place down. However, when it's coming from a space where it's like there's just constant anger, constant anxiety or depression or those denser energies, those are showing up. That would be my suggestion, to look in and see what it is and just allow that emotion to be there without the judgment of this person did that or this situation, if it would only change. Because on the way it's looking, and from my experiences, from me chasing those healing modalities, that kept the experience going, because I kept going to an external source versus going to an internal source. And so this is the work we're going to be doing here. And I want you to know that, like I said earlier, you are heard. You're not alone. I know it may feel like you're alone out there. And this is a space that you can tune into to listen to someone like myself who's been going through it as well. Because that's been my biggest challenge, is it felt like nobody could understand what I was experiencing, even those closest to me. They would offer support, they would listen when I would share, and their responses just confirm that they don't really get it. And so I felt very alone. And so I'll share books that I've read, I'll share exercises, supplements, because I know all those things helped to facilitate certain processes. However, ultimately, at the end of the day, it's a process of letting go. The old version is, in simple terms, is dying. And the new version of you has not yet has not yet arisen. You don't know who it is. So we're stuck in the in-between. And what tends to happen is that's uncomfortable, because we're used to having this identity of who and what we are and what we believe and what we're a part of and all of that. However, in that packaging, there's a lot of things that aren't good, that aren't effective, right? And so for me, one of those things is the word integration. I had a completely different understanding with this, and it's only until 3 months ago. My understanding of integration is you have an awareness, a new light bulb goes off, and that aha feeling was the awareness integrating into the body. That's my context. And it wasn't until 3, 4 months ago that I realized that it's actually actionable items or steps to support you in integrating those things into your daily life. And once I realized that, that's when I started taking little bites in my day to incorporate and add new actions in my life based on the darkness that I've been in. So the things I've been reflected against or with, however you want to word that, over the last 4 years has been things that I'm starting to take action and make a conscious choice that I'm changing. And that's what I'm grateful for. Because when I look back, I can see all of the things that I did ineffectively. And it's a process that sucks. However, again, my stubborn self didn't want to let it go, and such that now I'm facing it and now moving through it. And I want to support other people out there. And so if you're listening to this, like, keep going. Keep going. And I hope you keep listening to this, because I'm going to provide more information, more tools, more techniques, break things down. You know, another analogy you can use is like being faced in front of a mirror forcefully, and you're reflecting on all the things you did and didn't do from the perspective of ineffective or perceived negative. So there's no way to see a positive spin on things. It's getting real honest. It's like forced honest feedback with yourself, and you experience it. And it's the raw, just raw, hard, hellish landscape of going through that level of depression or anxiety and all of that gunk, I guess you could say, being extracted from the system. However, if it's coming up and we keep holding on to it with stories, mental constructs, labels, unfortunately, we're going to keep ourselves there longer than necessary. And so I hope you continue to listen. I appreciate you listening to the very first episode, and, follow, like, do the magical things out there to stay in touch here. At the end of the day, as we progress down this road, I hope this becomes that ember in your dark. And that's where the title came from, is me being in the dark and feeling lost, is this podcast being a small ember for you. Because no matter how dark it gets, even the smallest of embers can light your path. If you're in the darkest of darkest places, zero light, even the smallest of ember will be able to light and guide your way, and you'll be able to see it from miles away. And another piece of that is, if you're really in the dark, it's because there's a lot of light that's surrounding you to create that shadow. And it's a process of integrating that. And so thank you for tuning in. More episodes coming. I appreciate you all. Keep it going. Keep listening. Thank you so much.